Hello, class. It's Miss Roberts here, and today I want to talk about the classical theories of management. When reviewing the chapter, one of the most interesting things that I can gain from this chapter is that many of the organizations that I've worked for and that I've experienced, I can see some of the influences of classical management theory to the organizations today. And the book also addresses how these theories are applied today. So we're just going to go over several major classical management theories. And I want you to think about, hey, where do I, for especially for those of us who are working, where do I fit on the org chart? And how does my organization match these types of theories and processes? Let's begin. All right, so let me go ahead and go over here. So, at the end of the chapter, we're going to understand the ways in which a machine metaphor provides insight into organizational communication. Appreciate the historical context of earlier years with of the 20th century when classical approaches to organization or organizing were proposed, and being familiar with Henry Fayol's theory of classical management, especially with his principle of management regarding structure, power, reward, and attitude. Know how Max Weber's theory of bureaucracy corresponds to Fayol's ideas and be able to discuss the forms of authority that Weber describes as existing organizations, especially bureaucracy. So you've heard that word before. We're going to hear it again later on. Be able to describe the key aspects of Frederick Taylor's theory of scientific management and explain how his ideas responded to the concerns about the industry at this time. So remember, we are taking perspectives from the early industrial age. So if you think about it in that context, make a lot more sense. We're trying to figure out, okay, how do we go from family organizational structures to mass production, large organizations, how to manage people, and how to run those businesses effectively. And then finally, understand how communication processes are influenced by the theory of classical management and be able to recognize principles of classical organizing in contemporary organizations such as in employee analytics and workplace surveillance. So, like I said before, as I reviewed the chapter, as we went over theory, I'm like, oh, I recognize this structure. I recognize this how my managers interacted with me. It also talked about power dynamics, reward. So it's a very interesting chapter. It doesn't seem like it at first, but I do want you to recognize and see, oh, I've seen this before. I understand this. And it can also say, for instance, if you aspire to have managerial positions in the future, you'll understand your role in those organizations. All right. So, like I said before, we had the pre-industrial revolution where primary work is from individuals, small groups, artisan families, cottage industries, and it differed from the factories. But once we had mass production, factories, mechanization, we had to figure out how do we manage these resources? How do we manage the people, which we'll be focusing on today? And how do we expand and make our production more efficient? So these were some of the struggles from the pre and the industrial revolution, and those influences from people trying to solve those problems affect us to this day in the information age. The machine metaphor. So it's central to organizational theories like, hey, you've probably heard a saying such as, hey, this is run like a well-oiled machine. But that didn't come from nowhere. Notice that in the picture, we have people in the assembly lines, and each person had a role in the production of the product. It looks like they are putting wheels together. So this might be, oh, okay. This is from the Ford Motor Company as a Detroiter and whose grandfather also worked for Ford back in the day. I can definitely appreciate the picture and appreciate this metaphor a little bit more. But the machine metaphor gave us the ideas that, of course, influences our influences our organizations today. Specialization, division of labor, standardization, and predictability. So nowadays, at least one company that comes to mind is Amazon, the Amazon warehouses, and how each person does their role in putting the packages together, making sure they're shipped, and making sure they arrived at our door, that the products arrive at our door at a certain time. So that's one modern example I have in my head. But from that organizational structure, we have the machine metaphor. Each person has their own role. There's a division of labor, so they have their own roles. There's people on top telling telling the subordinates what to do and how to run the organization smoothly. It's standardization, so one factory is the same as another factory, it's the same as the other organization, and they operate in the same structure. And because of the standardization, there's predictability. So say for instance, if I worked for a factory in Michigan and I am transferred to Indiana, I should expect to have the same type of work unless I have a promotion or what have you. Unless I have a promotion, excuse me. If I'm doing the same amount of work or the same type of work, I should expect to be very familiar and be able to predict the tasks that I would do in Indiana, even though I started out in Detroit. All right, so next we're going to explore the Fayos theory of classical management. So there are several fundamental elements of management according to Fayol. So remember, at the time, we're trying to figure out, okay, now we have these large organizations, we have these factories, we're industrializing, and we are growing and expanding. So how do we manage and become efficient with these fundamental changes of work? So with the invention, not the invention, but the increased or standardized role of management, they all saw a gap. Because if you're the person in the previous picture, right, they know what they're going to do. They know, hey, we put this part together, we're in the assembly line, and that's what I do. But what do the people managing them do? So that's where they all saw that gap. So in order to make managing more efficient, so the supervision of the subordinates become more efficient, here are the five elements. We have planning, so considering the future to attain organizational goals. So it's not just what is happening right now, but what are the quarterly goals? What are the yearly goals? What can we do now to make our production more efficient? Are there any issues or any problems? What are some threats in future? So for example, we have the term SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So if you might have heard that before in other business courses, but that is one classical way to plan for internal and external factors. Then we have organizing, arranging human resources and evaluating employees. So like I said before, we went from employees being in the home, family, college, arts and industries to the factory or to larger organizations. So we have our natural resources, we have the products that are being produced, but human resources and managing people are key to a successful company. Then we have task. So set tasks for employees to meet organizational goals. How do managers set those goals and set those tasks and communicate those tasks clearly to employees? Coordination. So separate activities that must be harmonized into a single whole. So think about the company you work for. I'm definitely thinking about the company I work for. I'm an instructor within large organizations. I'm an adjunct professor, so each organization is slightly different, but I understand my role in those organizations. So no matter what we're thinking about, each individual activity or task we do is a part of the whole system. So with the next element, we have control. So it's comparison between goals and activities to ensure that the organization is functioning. So like I was saying before, in planning, what are some of the external threats? What are some of the internal threats? What are some inefficiencies? Is it within a person? Is it within an organization? Is it within how the systems are run? How do we make sure that our goals and activities, so the tasks that are being done within an organization, meeting the overarching organizational goals? All right. So one aspect of fail that can be kind of a blessing and a curse is that it's prescriptive, meaning this is what you do. He's not necessarily describing this is how it is. No, this is how it should be done to run the organization smoothly. So it gives us a great blueprint. And like I said before, I see a lot of fails, blueprints, and foundations in the organizations that I have worked for in the past and today. All right. So here are some additional principles of effective organizational management. So the Scalar chain is an organization arranged by vertical hierarchy. I'm going to go one slide over. So you've probably seen an org chart or organizational chart before. And the idea of organizational chart is that you have people at the top and people at the bottom. So if an employee at the bottom has an issue, they can talk to the person at the top, person at the top, person at the top, person at the top. Then people at the top can give directions to their subordinates, and that flow of information goes down. So we are going to talk about the flow of communication in a moment, but I just want to get a visual of what that looks like. Then we have unity of command. So employers receive orders from only one supervisor. You might have heard the term too many chefs in the kitchen, right? So having one chef is cool, but then you want to make sure that instructions or goals aren't that, excuse me, that goals and instructions are clearly being handled, being communicated. Because remember, the ultimate goal is efficiency. So that's why unity of command is so important to this theory. The unity of direction. So the goal should be placed under a single supervisor. So not only do employees receive orders from a supervisor, but a single supervisor should establish what those goals are. Then we have division of labor. So employees are assigned a limited number of specialized tasks. So thinking about the machine metaphor, thinking about, hey, for instance, when we think of efficiency, so keywords efficiency, instead of having one person trying to do everything, you only have so many hours in a day. A person can only do so much in both physical and mental energy. So making sure that we spread efficiently. So we're going to talk about scientific management theory in a minute just to make sure to streamline these processes. But at least the original idea is to say, hey, how many employees, if we give them a limited number of tasks, how efficiently can they achieve this goal, achieve this task? And then there's order. So it's appointed places for each employee and task in the organization. So each employee has a job to do or a set of things to do, right? So employee wouldn't overstep their boundaries and do the task with manager, and the manager may guide subordinate of how to do their task, but they don't do the task, right? And then we have span of control. So managers are most effective with a limited number of employees because remember, human resources are limited, right? So we can only do so much. So what is the maximum amount of work that a person, or in this case, the manager, can do? Okay, so we just looked at that org chart again. We have top people in the organizational chart, board directors, president, executive staff, so vice president of each department, and then the managers of each department, and the workers that are under them. So this looks familiar. All right. So some overarching principles of organizational power and organizational reward is that we have centralized power in that previous org chart. We have few people at the top, and then let me go ahead and just show it to you again. Going back and forth here. We have few people at the top, but as we go lower in the chart, there's more people handling the task. So that's that centralized power idea. Authority and responsibility. So those at the top have a set number of responsibilities. They have the power and authority to guide and give responsibilities to the subordinates. And they also have the power to discipline, so write-ups or firing, hiring, all those tasks. But then there's the idea of organizational reward. So making sure that we have the right number of personnel. Do they have equal opportunities? Do they have tenure stability? So are they able to get properly compensated for their work? Instead of, remember, this is excuse me, Industrial Revolution time. So in previous organizations or previous businesses, they were small family business. So of course, the son or the daughter will get the promotion. Or we have organizations within families. So say for instance, an employee comes in who's not family, they might not be able to move up in the business because they're not related to the person. Now, with organizational reward, it changes all that. Everybody has equal opportunity, in theory, to get promoted, to do their task without having to worry about centralization of power within a family, right? So that's where the organizational reward comes in, being able to be compensated fairly and have a chance or a shot to promotion. Then, principles of organizational attitude, subordination of individual interest to general interest. So, one of the interesting parts of reading the chapter is the idea of separating work and personal life, right? And creating initiative. Like, hey, you need to be able to prove yourself to the company and just make sure that you're working for the company interests, right? So having like a company culture that your work self is different than your personal self. Versus in a family organization, it might not have been the case, right? In modern, not in all organizations, so I'll put that out there. But sometimes we have this idea of work-life balance, right? Getting back to, hey, understanding employee as a holistic person with families, with interests and goals outside of the workplace. But during this time, now that was relevant. It's about separating your own personal interests to the interests of the company. And the remnants of that idea can be seen today. All right. So the summary of Fayol's theory is that it's a little bit more prescriptive rather than descriptive or explanatory. So not this is what it is in organizations. No, this is what you should do in organizations. Now, it's nice if we're able to be able to if we're able to run an organization as Fayol described, but because we're dealing with people, outside forces such as government and political forces, like we talked about in chapter one, and just all types of different unknowns, that prescription is good as a foundation, but we have to make sure to put it in practice and be flexible enough to make changes. So now we're going to the theory of classical management, and that has a huge impact on how we view organizations today. So now we're going to expand on the Weber's theory of bureaucracy. And we might have heard of the term bureaucracy before, right? Oh, excuse me. So you might have heard of the term bureaucracy before. I usually hear the term bureaucracy in government organizations and think of the DMV, right? You make your appointment, you go in, you sign in, and you go to different little desks and little different departments within the organization. A slower process, efficient, maybe, but there you know that there is a prescribed order of when to do task in the organization. When you try to go outside or ask questions or say, hey, can you let something slide? That doesn't happen. It's very defined. So let me go ahead and talk about what, or take a deeper dive on what bureaucracy is according to Weber, and see if you know of any organizations that follow this structure. So have a clearly defined hierarchy. So hierarchy is very important. You have people at the top, people in the middle, people at the bottom, with a distinct division of labor. So this person only does this thing. They don't really go outside. Not necessarily maybe in smaller companies, organizations where you might have an overlapping of tasks, or maybe a supervisor might help out a subordinate, or subordinate might come up with new ideas and help with leading of the projects. Those lines don't necessarily cross in a bureaucracy. Centralization of decision making and power. So we just seeing that organization chart that the few people at the top tell everyone else at the bottom what to do. Relatively closed systems. So if you've heard of systems theory before, there are internal systems and external systems. And when we think of a closed system, it is not affected by the outside world or outside influences. So technical cores, the book talks about a doctor's office where what the existence of that business is for the doctor to see patients. That is what it is for. And nothing should impede on the doctor seeing the patients. However, it's not, but say for instance, to make that company run, you will need receptionists, you will need accountants, you will need janitorial staff to clean the office. So you'll need all these other entities, but the technical core is doctors seeing patients. So within that closed system, the receptionist handles the patients. Then we have people in billing that helps with billing, janitorial that helps keep the office clean. So the doctor can see the patients and do their job. So not only do we have a closed system, so making sure that the doctor doesn't have to worry about checking the patient in, or the doctor doesn't have to worry about cleaning the office. Does that make sense? So with a closed system, it protects that technical core and keeps that business running. And the importance of rules. So both Vail and Weber, excuse me, both Vail and Weber make an importance of written rules. I don't know if you've ever had someone tell you this in a business setting or in an organizational setting or even an academic setting. Put things in writing, because you can say, hey, I told you this happened, or hey, this is a series of events, and I can show you the emails, I can show you the memos. So that same idea of how written word or written rules carry so much more weight than verbal comes from these theories. Like, hey, put the rules in writing. Make sure everybody knows. This is refer to the rules, refer to the code of conduct, refer to the handbook. That's where that comes from. And the functioning of authority. So, in my experience and familiarity of leadership styles, it kind of falls into this because in more modern leadership styles, we have this idea of leaders sharing authority and sharing power with others. It's a more Western, more modern take, right? But remember, this is a historical chapter. So we have to figure out, like, during this time, hierarchies within society and within organizations are important. So the function of authority is to lead, is to take charge. So there was no back and forth between subordinates and superiors or managers. So that is the function of authority, especially in bureaucracies. That can still be seen to this day. Authority on top, subordinates do what they say. All right, which leads me into, oh, excuse me, types of power. So authority is based on three grounds: traditional or legitimate authority. So these are people who are appointed or are official. The book talks about kings and queens, or we can talk about traditional legitimate authority as well, people appointed, politicians, and the like. Then we have charismatic authority, so the ability to attract, interact with followers. Think about influencers, think about notable celebrities or notable politicians. But then we have rational legal authority. So this is based on expertise, information, rules, and norms. So in current and especially those bureaucratic systems, that's important. You were hired based on what you know and based on who your family was, not based if you have a cult like following. No, what do you know and how and does what you know help the organization? So this is, excuse me, the rational, the legal authority type of power or authority is what bureaucracies are based on. So I move myself over a little bit. Oh, I keep doing that. My apologies, class. All right. Okay. All right. So next we have the theory of scientific management. So I alluded to in the beginning of the lecture that we have a change from family businesses, small businesses to industry, right? And with that needed structure and order. So we understand that. So now we're refining that structure and order with the use of science. So remember, this is the Industrial Revolution, and of course, the shifting of social and societal emphasis on science. What is science? And we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we apply science to everyday life? This is no different. So with the scientific theory of management, we are trying to figure out how can we use the scientific method to make organizations more efficient. And when we think about historically apprenticeships, although apprenticeships are good and being able to start on the job, it just led to an uneven quality of work, and the work pay system resulted in issues with rewarding efficient workers. So, for example, in the book, they talked about the bricklaying and how there was an incentive by bricklayers who worked harder or worked more efficiently didn't necessarily get paid, or their pay wasn't reflective of that increased efficiency, which resulted into systematic soldering, which is a social pressure among workers to keep productivity down but wages up. So remember, we're talking about human resources, motivation. So you wouldn't want to work more for less, or you wouldn't be motivated to work more just to not get compensated for it. So a tailored solution uses a scientific management to address these impediments to optimal productivity. So with that particular study, he was able to increase the workload by double or by triple by using the scientific method. And what he did was he studied like, hey, what are some inefficient movements of the bricklayers? How can we make it more efficient for them? So for example, instead of having the bricklayers bend down and put the bricks up, they made it eye level so they didn't waste time bending down, and that accumulated time for them efficiently laying the bricks helped increase productivity. So this was due the time through the time motion studies. So not only are we concerned with if the employee is doing the task, are they doing the task efficiently? And what kind of tools can we give them to do the job more efficiently? And then we also want to make sure to have the proper selection of workers for the job, what are their skills and attributes that will help the organization run more efficiently, and training workers to do the task in the ultimate amount of time. So there's also an inherent and strong division of labor. Managers do the thinking, forward planning, and the direct supervision of the workers who are just there to labor. You're there to lay bricks. That's all you're going to do. All right. So finally, we have communication and classical approaches. So this is organizational communication. One of the goals of the chapter is to help us understand these classical approaches to management, what they are, and now we're going to see its impact on communication. So, with classical organizations, there is a direct vertical downward flow of communication. Written form is paramount, and style of communication is formal. So, if you recognize, think about corporate America. So, if you recognize some of these rules, like, hey, formal dress, or hey, put things in writing, or hey, let's use formal language of communicating, these foundations are from these classical theories that still permeate to this day. All right. So we have the three kinds of communication that are paramount in these settings. So, for example, task-related communication. So the communication between employees, supervisors, just based on job and work processes. Then we have innovation-related communication. So if you have a new idea, we put that in the forefront. But of course, these innovations are for the betterment of the company. And then maintenance-related communication. So the communication on social topics that maintain some relationships. Yeah, maybe small talk and just making sure that hey, we humanize the organization to have the cohesiveness the of the workers. But such communication is not necessarily super encouraged if it's not aligned with organizational goals. So think about workplace retreats, right? The workplace retreats is not necessarily about bonding with our coworkers for the sake of bonding with our coworkers. It's with the ultimate goal of, hey, happier workers means more productive workers, which ultimately leads to a better, more efficient company. So even if it seems like, oh, they're being nice and giving us a pizza party, the pizza party is to get you guys to work harder later. All right. All right. So with that direction of communication flow, vertically up and down the organizational chart. So if you think about a couple of slides back, supervisors and subordinates communicate with each other. Then you can also have horizontal communication. So within the same line of the organizational chart, employees communicate with each other. But then there's also free flowing, where all members of the organization can freely communicate with each other. Now, in classical theories, because we have to remember the time period in which this is set up, free flowing communication was rare. So it's usually top down communication for the most part. Then we also have different channels of communication. So thinking about from chapter one and many of our communication studies classes, we talk about the methods of communication, excuse me, the models of communication and channels being one of them. So we have face-to-face channels, written channels that are emphasized by Weber and Fail. So these can include handbooks, instructions, mission statements, rules, and performance evaluations. Everything must be in writing. You can definitely see these trends today. Various mediated channels. So thinking about to today's time, face-to-face conversations, phone calls, video calls, emails, and memos. So these are the classic channels of communication within the organization. All right. So just a review of the style of communication that we're familiar with, especially with large businesses, organizations, and corporations. Very highly formal and very highly structured titles such as supervisor, secretary, administrative assistants, managers. Those titles, those titles help us distinguish management from additional employees. Messages avoid slang and colloquial terms, very highly standardized or technical language within the organization. Nonverbal communication, such as dress styles, reflect formality with preference for suits, ties, or uniforms. So this is the way we verbally and non-verbally communicate with or within organizations, which is based on these earlier theories. So you can definitely see within organizations how this is reflected today. So speaking of which, all right. So we can see today where the influences of these earlier theories can be seen. So in military organizations, we have the scholar chain, unity of command, and span of control. The book addresses crime such as sexual violence within these organizations and how difficult it is for victims to find justice because of the rigid command chains. So with these type of organizations, and especially to deal with modern problems, they have to expand and make sure that make sure that they do protect the people within these organizations and not just rely on rigid command chains to obstruct justice. Classical structures extend to manufacturing and service sectors. So I gave some examples of Amazon. The book also gives examples of fast food and other manufacturing types of places. Of course, Ford is still in existence today, other manufacturing places, but we do have robotics to help out with some of those tasks. People are still there, but you will see those classical organizations and structures be reflected in today's organizations. Nonprofit organizations adopt classical structures for efficiency and minimizing, with the ultimate goal of minimizing waste and maximizing resource utilization. So even though we might have modernized some aspects of organizations and how they run and structure, we still see those classic roots of Fayol's and Weber's theory and Taylor's theories today. Then we have classical design and rewards in today's organizations. So because modern problems require modern solutions, we also have employee analytics. So we were able to gather data more efficiently, especially through technology, to see how people are efficiently working. If you think about during the pandemic with at home, with some at home positions, what was happening was they wanted to make sure that employees were at their desk working, even though they're at their home. So they would have, what was it called? They would track how much they typed, or they would track the movements of the mouse. So they might have a check-in with Slack, like, hey, check in, make sure that you're there. So with those types of jobs who would normally have someone clock in or, clock in on a punch clock, they had to figure out, okay, how do we know that people, although working from home, are actually working? So using technology and analytics, they were able to monitor those tasks. So technology enables sophisticated application of classical theories, and financial rewards remain crucial for motivation. Times are tough and cost of living is high. So with more options for different types of work and a greater awareness of fair compensation and advocacy for fair compensation, yes, financial rewards do remain crucial for motivation. All right, to summarize, we understand the ways in which machine metaphor provides insight into organizational communication. And we are looking through this with the historical context of the early 20th century and how they affect us today. Now we're familiar with Fayol's theory of classical management and then how these principles of management is also reflected in structure, power, reward, and attitude. They were also talking about how Weber's theory of bureaucracy corresponds, and you can see a lot of overlap with Thayer's ideas to talk about authority in organizations, especially bureaucracies, which we can also see today. Be able to describe key aspects of Taylor's theory of scientific management and how his ideas corresponded with concerns about the industry at the time. There wasn't an incentive to be more efficient if they did a price per item pay structure. So he made those changes and used a scientific method to say, how can we do this task more efficiently? Then we're going to understand, or we understand now, how communication processes are influenced by classical theory of management and recognize the principles of classical organizing in contemporary organizations such as employee analytics and workplace surveillance. All right. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you do have any questions about classical theory, how it relates to organization, or relates to an organization that you recognize, please let me know. I'll talk to you soon. All right, class. Bye.